Are you ready to break free from the doubts and limits holding you back? Welcome to Embrace Your Value, where therapy meets coaching to help you unlock your true worth and take control of your life.
Hi, I'm Kristen, a trauma therapist dedicated to helping you heal, break old patterns, and reclaim your power.
And I'm Jen, your support coach, here to show you how to set fierce boundaries, embrace self-compassion, and step boldly into the life you deserve.
So whether you're stuck in self-doubt or feeling lost, know this: your value isn't up for negotiation. It's time to own it.
Every week, we tackle real issues that challenge, inspire, and empower you to live with purpose and confidence.
So grab your favorite drink, take a deep breath, and let's get started.
Because you're not here to play small. It's time to embrace your value. I want to ask you something, and I want you to really sit with it before you answer. What permission are you waiting for? In the 6 years of coaching women, one of the most consistent things I've witnessed is this: women who are smart, capable, deeply self-aware are waiting for the right moment, waiting for things to settle down, waiting for someone to tell them it's okay to go after what they want. And the waiting always has a reason, a good reason, a responsible one. Once the kids are older, once we're in a better place financially, once things calm down at work, once my husband really understands what I need, and once I feel more ready. And I'm not saying those things don't matter, but I want you to notice something. Those conditions are almost never fully met. And the women who are waiting for them, they're not lazy. They're not ungrateful. They are often some of the most giving, thoughtful, hardworking people I know. They're just living like someone else has to approve their happiness before they are allowed to have it. Today, we're talking about who gave you that idea and what it would look like to take the permission back. Welcome to Embrace Your Value. I'm Jen Anderson, a belief and boundary specialist and your co-host.
And I'm Kristen Burrus, trauma therapist. Today's episode is one that I think is going to land for a lot of people because the pattern we're talking about is so common and so quiet that most people don't even recognize it as a pattern. They think it's just being responsible.
And that is exactly the trap. Because waiting can look incredibly reasonable from the outside. It can look like wisdom, like patience, like good planning.
And sometimes underneath it, it's something else entirely.
Yeah. So let me paint you some pictures, because I think the waiting becomes more visible when you see it up close. So let's talk about waiting for the kids to grow up. This is one of the most common ones that I hear. And I really want to be careful here because I'm not minimizing what it takes to raise children. That season is real and it's demanding. But there's a version of this that goes beyond the practical. It's when a woman who has quietly put her own dreams, her own ambitions, her own sense of self on a shelf. And she's told herself that she'll come back to it when the kids are older, when they don't need as much, when she can finally focus. And then the kids get older and there's always something else. because the waiting wasn't really about the kids. The kids were a legitimate, socially acceptable reason to delay the scarier thing, which is actually going after what she wants and risking that it might not work out. I worked with a woman who had wanted to go back to school for 15 years. 15. She had 3 reasons why she couldn't. And every time one of those reasons resolved, a new one appeared. When we finally got underneath it, what she said was, I think I'm afraid that if I try and it doesn't work, I'll have nothing left to hope for. That hit me hard. And that's not a scheduling problem. That's fear dressed up as responsibility. Talk about the second one, which is waiting for finances to be perfect. Money is real. Financial stress is real. I'm not dismissing that. But there's also a version of waiting for financial security that has very little to do with actual numbers and everything to do with permission. As long as the finances aren't perfect, the dream stays in the future. It never has to be tested. It never has to face possible failure. I've seen women wait for a financial condition that kept moving, saving this much, then it was that much. Pay off this, then there was something else. And the goalposts moved every single time they got close because the money wasn't actually the barrier. So let's also talk about this other one, which is waiting for someone to finally understand. And I think for me, this one is the most tender because it's about longing to be truly seen. It's about a woman who's waiting for her partner to understand what she needs before she lets herself pursue it. Waiting for her family to get on board before she makes a change. Waiting for someone, anyone, to look at her life and say, yes, go. We see you and we support you. I had a very devastating conversation with a longtime client earlier this week where she told me, I realized what my limiting belief is. It's that I don't ever feel seen or valuable. And that was rough because I always see her as this well put together woman who's raising a family, who's excellent at her job, who's doing all the things. And yes, she deals with some anxiety and sometimes she struggles with boundaries and we do all these things, but underneath it all, she doesn't even feel valued. And she doesn't think she's ever been seen. So this one hits home because a lot of my clients deal with this. When we get that validation, it's beautiful. But here's what I've said to clients more than once. And this is also what I said to her. You may be waiting for that validation for someone to see you, to understand you. There might not be anybody in your life that's genuinely capable of giving that to you. They may not even understand that. And this is not because they don't love you, but because your growth asks something of them too. And they may not be ready for that. Waiting for someone else to understand before you move is like handing someone else the keys to your entire life.
What Jen is describing, all those versions of waiting, I'd like to name what's underneath them, because I think when we understand the mechanism, it's harder to stay fooled by it. Waiting is almost always fear dressed up as responsibility. And I want to say that with compassion. because the fear is real. This is not about calling anyone out, but fear is a very clever thing. It rarely shows up and announces itself. Hi, I'm fear. It shows up wearing the face of wisdom, caution, practicality, being realistic, feeling in control. From a psychological standpoint, what's happening in the waiting is something called avoidance. And avoidance is one of the most effective short-term anxiety management strategies there is. If I don't try to do it, I can't fail at it. If I stay in the planning phase, I never have to find out if the dream actually works. If I keep the conditions just slightly unmet, I stay protected. The problem is that avoidance, while it reduces anxiety in the short term, actually increases it over time. The thing you're avoiding gets bigger, more charged, more frightening, because you've now spent months or years, like Jen's example, treating it like something dangerous enough that you have to keep your distance from it. And there's another layer. For many women, waiting is also connected to a deep internalized belief that their desires are not quite as legitimate as everyone else's needs. That what they want is a luxury, something to get eventually, after everything and everyone else has been taken care of. That belief didn't develop in a vacuum. It was taught through explicit messages and implicit messages, through watching what the women before them prioritized, through being praised for self-sacrifice and quietly penalized for self-focus. And it runs very deep, which is why pointing out the waiting isn't usually enough to stop it. The belief underneath has to be examined. So let's go deeper on 3 specific patterns that tend to show up inside the waiting. Why we delay joy. So there's something I see repeatedly in therapy that I think is worth naming. Many people have an unconscious belief that joy is something that has to be earned, that it comes after the work is done, work before play, after you suffered enough, after you've proven you're responsible enough to deserve it. And this belief shows up in surprisingly concrete ways. It's that woman who won't book the trip until everything else is taken care of. The woman who won't start the creative project until she's earned the free time. The woman who deflects compliments because accepting them feels like getting ahead of herself. Joy delayed indefinitely becomes joy denied. And a life where joy is always one condition away is a life that never quite arrives.
From a coaching standpoint, I'd add joy is actually a compass, not a reward. When something lights you up, that's information. It's pointing at something real about who you are and what you're here to do. Treating it like a treat you get after you've finished your vegetables means you're ignoring one of the most reliable signs you have. So let's talk about why confidence comes after action, not before. And this is another one that I'm passionate about because I think it's one of the most damaging myths women carry. The myth is this: I'll do it once I feel ready, once I feel confident, once I feel sure enough. And the truth is, that feeling very rarely comes first. Confidence is not a prerequisite for action. It's a product of it. You become confident by doing the thing while you're scared, by taking one imperfect step and surviving it, by showing yourself through experience rather than preparation that you are more capable than your fear is telling you. I've watched women wait years for a confidence that was never going to arrive through thinking and planning alone. And I've watched those same women take one terrifying step and feel more capable at the end of that day than they had in years. Not because it went perfectly, but because they showed up.
The neuroscience supports this. The brain builds confidence through repeated exposure to experiences of competence. You have to do something enough times, imperfectly, uncomfortably, before the brain starts to encode it as something you can handle. Waiting until you feel ready neurologically, waiting for something that the brain can only provide through the very experience you're avoiding. It's a closed loop, and the only way out is through.
That's a great point, Kristen. And I had a coach actually tell me this story, and I used it for a couple of years after I first heard it. But that is that buffaloes are the only animal that actually go all the way through the storm. So if there's a storm coming, they don't turn and run the other way. They know the quickest way through it is to just go through it. And that's their quickest way out of it. And so I always love that example because it's true. And if we do the same thing, if we just face it head on and go through it, it makes it so much better, so much quicker. And then we get through it. So I love that you brought that in because it's so very true. Let's talk about the midlife moment. There has to be more than this. And I like this one specifically because I feel like so much of our audience is in midlife. And I know the women that I coach are mostly in midlife. And this moment is so common and so disorienting when it arrives. Something shifts. It's not always dramatic. Sometimes it's quiet. You're going through an ordinary Tuesday and something in you surfaces that says, is this it? Is this what I built? Because it doesn't feel like enough. That voice can feel like being ungrateful, like a crisis, something to push back down on. But in my experience, that voice is not a problem. It's a signal. It's the self that got deferred for years, for the kids, for partners, careers, approval. And it's finally getting loud enough to be heard. And the question is whether you're going to listen to it or shame it into silence again.
From a developmental standpoint, midlife is actually a well-documented period of psychological reevaluation. Carl Jung called it the second half of life, a time when the questions shift from what do I need to achieve to who am I actually becoming? What feels like a crisis is often an invitation. The scaffolding that held the first half of our life together, the roles, the expectations, the deferred dreams, starts to feel ill-fitting. Not because something is wrong with you, but because you have grown and that old container no longer fits. The there has to be more moment is not a malfunction. It is maturity asking for more room.
So what does it actually look like to stop waiting? Because I don't want this to just be a conversation that leaves you feeling seen, but stuck. The first thing I want to say is you do not have to make a dramatic leap. Most of the women I've worked with who have reclaimed their lives did it in small, consistent moves, not one big, courageous moment, but a series of small ones that accumulated into something real. It starts with a decision, not a full plan, not a fully formed strategy, a decision that says, I'm going to stop waiting for conditions that may never fully arise. And I'm going to take one step toward what I actually want. And then you take that step before you feel ready, because ready is not coming first. And I say this with so much love. Ready is not coming first. And I also want to say that sometimes that first step is really getting clear on what you want, what it is you pushed onto the back burner, put on that shelf that now you want and you are craving. Because sometimes we don't even remember. And the second thing is this: you have to be willing to disappoint someone, because most of the waiting is at its root about not wanting to disrupt someone else's expectations, not wanting to seem selfish, not wanting to rock a boat that has been very carefully balanced. But a life that's been designed around not disappointing anyone is a life that's been designed around everyone except you. And what I'd like to point out here is this: you are still disappointing someone. You're disappointing you. It's you that's taking the brunt of it. And we justify that and say that's okay. But it's not. It's time for you to take your power back and bring it back, because you deserve to be in your own life fully, not as a supporting character in everyone else's story, and not as a supporting character in your own. Be in your life.
And we would like to give you some practical tools. As Jen said, we want you to not feel stuck. So we're going to give you some ways to feel unstuck. So there are 3 things to work with this week.
The first one is the permission question. This is your writing prompt, and it's the one we started the episode with. Taken a step further. What would I do if I knew I couldn't fail or disappoint anyone? Write the first thing that comes up. Don't filter it. Don't edit it for reasonableness. Just write what's actually true. And then answer this: what is the smallest possible version of that thing I could do this week? Not the full version, not the 5-year plan, the smallest version. Because starting small is not thinking small. It's removing the paralysis of scale and giving yourself a way in.
Tool number 2 is name the waiting. This week, try to get specific about what you're waiting for. Not in a vague sense, but actually write it down. I am waiting for blank before I allow myself to blank. Fill in those blanks honestly, and then ask yourself, how long have I been waiting for this condition to be met? Has it ever been fully met before? What is the realistic likelihood that it will be met fully? Sometimes just seeing the waiting that you're doing written down in plain language, your own language, without all the justifications around it, is enough to shift something, because it stops living as a background hum and becomes something you can actually examine.
Tool number 3 is one act of self-authorization. I love the word self-authorization because it puts the permission exactly where it belongs, with you. This week, I want you to do one thing you've been waiting for permission to do. Again, it doesn't have to be big. It just has to be real. Maybe it's making an inquiry about something you've been curious about. Maybe it's buying the book. Maybe it's telling one person about the thing you've been keeping quietly to yourself. Maybe it's just writing it down for the first time and not immediately talking yourself out of it. Maybe it's finding an accountability partner and sharing this podcast with them so that they can do their one thing and you can do your one thing and you guys can hold each other accountable. Always a great way to do these things. But one act this week, no one has to approve it in advance.
I'd like to close with something I find myself saying in session more than a lot of other things. The life you're waiting to live, it's not on the other side of the perfect conditions or the perfect anything, including you. It's not waiting for your finances to stabilize or your kids to leave or your partner to finally understand. It's available right now in smaller ways than you might imagine and in more significant ways than you might even believe. That permission you're waiting for, I'd like to tell you something clearly. No one is coming to give it to you. Not because you don't deserve it, but because it was never theirs to give in the first place. You are the authority on your own life. You always have been. The work, the real work, is believing that. Not perfectly, not all at once, but enough to take the next step. So here's what I want you to carry with you this week. Not a task, just a question. Sit with it in the morning. Sit with it when the waiting starts to feel comfortable and familiar again. And that's this. What would I do if I trusted that I was already enough to begin? Because you are. And beginning, an imperfect, uncertain, permissionless beginning, is where everything actually starts. If this episode spoke to something in you, send us a message. Tell us what you're waiting for and what you're going to do instead. We'd love to hear it.
Thank you for being here with us, and we will see you next week on Embrace Your Value.
Thank you for being here with us today.
If today's episode hit home, don't just keep it to yourself. Subscribe, leave us a review, and share this episode with someone who needs to hear it. Because everyone deserves to know their worth.
Next week, we're diving even deeper with more insights and tools to help you break free from limitations and live authentically.
Until then, keep raising your standards, owning your worth, and embracing your value.